The Powerhouse Women Show is brought to you by Tell Your Story Incubator, an 8-week small group coaching and mentoring program for women founders, leaders, and entrepreneurs who have stories to tell that the world needs to hear. To learn more, email Monica at thepowerhousewomanshow.com. It's the Powerhouse Woman Show. You're a powerhouse woman, successful, accomplished, but you know the time has come for something else. To pivot, make a shift, or do what you've been putting off for a long time. I'm Monica Pierre, a media entrepreneur, Emmy Award-winning journalist and coach, and I'm on a mission to help you figure out your path forward and create powerful new stories about your life and legacy. There's more ahead. Time to do the greatest work of your life. Hello, once again. Welcome to the Powerhouse Woman Show. I'm Monica Pierre. So happy you've joined us. And on the show today, you may be a powerhouse woman who's not only a powerhouse woman, but you're the first in your family, the first in your community, maybe the first in your culture to accomplish something. And with that elevation comes some things that you may want to keep in mind. And we're joined by someone who really has a great idea of how to maneuver all of that. We're joined by Melissa Vila Williamson. She is the founder and also the communication architect, that's amazing, of MVW Communications. She is basically a powerhouse when it comes to community and also a powerhouse when it comes to public relations or PR. Thank you so much, Melissa, for being with us on the show today.
Thank you, Monica. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be with you today.
I love my guests because we have these very interesting conversations. And when I first met you with a coaching program or a webinar with Eleanor Beaton out of Nova Scotia, I had this idea. We had a conversation about things that we have accomplished. And people are always focusing on the first this, the first that. And many of us accomplished this first in our own family. So talk a little bit about that. What are some of the firsts that you have accomplished in your family or in your community or even in your culture?
Yeah, what a great question. I think a lot of us, particularly for coming from backgrounds of color, we may be the first. We may be the educational pioneer in our family. I think for me, that's where I started, is understanding early on. My mother did such a great job in empowering me as a young girl and really helping me understand that education was something no one could take from me. Right. I came from a family of divorce, and that was something that, really surprised my mother after 10 years of marriage, and she had to retool and change everything. She had been working as a cashier at a grocery store for about 22 years, and then she went back to school and got her associates in dental hygiene. And for our family, that really helped us and secured us as Kroger in our market shut down. And both her and then later on my stepdad at the time were working there. So he was a stalker and put cans on shelves, overnight, and worked very hard. And my mother was a cashier. And because that was a stable job with a predictable schedule so that she could be involved and help her at the time, 5 kids. And it was important, but for me to see her go through that later in life, as I was growing up, I was like, you know what, if she can do that with 5 children, and I was one, I'm so sorry, Mom, for knocking on the door and saying, come out. Well, she tried to study, then why couldn't I? Right. So that planted seeds early on is like, I think I should value things that really help and grow and compound over time in value in my life, like education, right? Things that were supported my stability and security and growth became very important to me. I didn't grow up being materialistic. That wasn't a value that was set for us, but other things were. So that was really exciting. And so I became the first to really start grabbing for different leadership roles. And as I grew up, I actually grew up as a very overweight young person. And so by the time I got to high school, I was obese, in that obese category, and nobody could quite hear me. But I realized that they could acknowledge my accomplishments. So I became very achievement oriented, which benefited my grades, thank goodness, and helped me get on my career path later on. But being the first to be a drum major, and then I was the first to go to a 4-year university and graduate, and then my sisters followed behind me,
Mm,
literally at the
mm.
same college. So I think that representation and here's how I did it, and that, inspires that me too in a positive way, right? Well, if she can do it, or he can do it, or they can do it, I can do it. And so when you know someone like you with your background, be it whatever that identity that's primary in your life is for you, it inspires you to say,
Right. And
why
even the
not?
old saying that if you see it or can see it, then you can be it.
That's right.
And if you don't really see it, and I think sometimes others don't recognize why we tend to make a big deal about some of these firsts, because it just, Nichelle Nichols, who was Lieutenant Uhura on Star Trek,
Mhm.
and it was because people saw someone as an actress doing something other than those traditional roles, and people
Right.
said, I want to go to space. I want this because they saw it.
That's
But
right.
when you see it, and you model after it, especially if you're that pioneer in the beginning, Melissa, it can be a challenge. It kind of throw you for a loop because things come up. What are some of the things that can come up for someone who is the first, whether it's education or entrepreneurship or just going out on their own, or just doing something different?
Oh gosh, fear, a lot of fear, right? And I know there's a lot of talk these days about imposter syndrome, but I think it's more fear based that we're like, can I do this? Am I good enough? And I work in public relations. That's the heart of how I approach communication because that's a people first mindset and point of view. But what I find is I do research and do more cultural strategy work and really center on values that unite us as people versus thinking about our demographic differences. It's very apparent that what we're looking for, all of us as individuals, is understanding that we matter and figuring out how we can feel like we matter is so important. So definitely fear when you can't find the way. I have a podcast that I am so honored to have and invite guests on at times, but I always start and I try to close each series that has a different theme. It's called the Smart Talk series. Sorry about that. Smart Talk series. And this Smart Talk series, season 4, is all about communication trailblazers. And in the first episode, I really unpack, Monica, like what is a pioneer, right? Someone who's the first to innovate or try something. So for me, I guess that big fundamental first was that college degree. But then from there, right, being the first one to work in an office and try public relations. Didn't know anyone who worked in PR, right? Heard about it my last semester. That's my big story. Of course, I want to be a veterinarian because what do we see, right? Kids see animals and they think about veterinarians first. But yeah, one science lab, and I was like, oh, this is not for me.
Yes.
But creative writing, communication, and loving to serve and helping people was. So I figured out that way through watching a peer in my class share about their public relations internship opportunity and finding some relatability in that. She didn't have the same background as me, but I knew her as a student. And so that's how we related. I thought, well, if she can, maybe I can, right? And it was just networking and asking around to find my first opportunity to freelance. It wasn't even a full time job in PR I started with. And that was scary. No one in my family had ever freelanced or been a contractor or been independent, whatever you want to call that. Nobody had done that. Traditional employment was what was comfortable. So when I started that, my family was uncomfortable. And
Yes.
fast forward 20 years, I have my own boutique PR firm, which is all the freelance life, right? It's all the contractor consultant life, whether I'm working with a large client or not. I mean, W-2s versus W-9s, it makes people uncomfortable. And you get used to that feeling of discomfort if you do follow your calling. So if you feel
Right.
called to do something new and that's outside of your family norm, which again, those from the Black community or African American community, Hispanic, Latino, Asian communities, a lot of us are brought up in a collectivist culture in our families, which is very group minded, which is wonderful for our relationships. But professionally, it can be something that makes us feel like we are doing something wrong or uncomfortable or different if we spin out and do something different, right, than our family tree has done.
Have
So
you
I,
also noticed
yeah.
that sometimes the reaction is that the collective, whether it's the family or the community, feels judged? that
Mm.
you doing something different is a negative reflection. You're dreaming bigger. You don't like what we like. We were the ones who gave you money for a peanut butter sandwich. Now you think you know, all of that
You
stuff
just
comes
think.
out. Yeah. So do you find that too, that they feel judged?
She's hitting that real talk, y'all.
Oh
Yes.
yeah.
Let's just be
Okay. Yes. Let's
honest.
bring it. Let's bring
Let's
it.
bring it. Not everyone followed my path, right? So I did have older brothers. I do have younger sisters, and of course, even then, my elders. Like, I'm doing something different. I get a bachelor's degree. I get a master's degree. I get a certification and accreditation PR, and then certification in this. As I kind of felt like I was going up the career ladder, the further away some of those I was close to felt. And bridging that gap relationally has been a challenge. And this October 25th, after in just a couple weeks, I'll come out with my own book based on helping more people of color and aspiring students and even journalists who transition into public relations understand, like, behind the curtain, real talk, smart talk about how this really works, what all you need to know, and offering them a personal invitation in, because we feel like we need that to have that representation, right, and relate to something new, but then also extra encouragement. And so that's really tough to balance. I'm
Yes.
not being judgmental just because I have new ideas, right, or new perspective. Um, and the better I do doesn't make anything you do less than. And so having that capacity and, I guess, acceptance early on to go, when I'm pioneering, and when I talk about my podcast, is that transition from that, right? Being the first to the trailblazer, which is, now let me smooth the path, let me blaze
Yes.
down, right? All the weeds in front of us to help others follow. I try to think like that trailblazer, where this is not something I'm just getting for myself. It's for my family. It's for my children. It's for my community, for those who are interested and curious or can't find, what to do with their English career, or, how to work out of the newsroom, right?
Yes.
In a
Yes.
different type of career. So I try to think like that. I think if we're being kind and respectful, and then just running our own race, like, hopefully those around us who are doing something different will get there with us on their own time.
That is so powerful. And I love how you make the distinction and of the process and the journey of pioneering and trailblazing, and then maybe eventually legacy. We could toss that
Yeah.
in there as well. So we talked about your podcast, the Smart Talk Series podcast, where you
Yeah.
mentioned pioneering and trailblazing. You're in season number 4. Kudos to that. That's amazing. The book is coming out. What's the name of the book?
So the book ended up being in the same alignment because I'm really intrigued by this concept of smart talk, right? Getting to the point, having those real talk conversations of depth and understanding, but that intelligent discourse. So it's called Smart Talk: Public Relations Essentials All Pros Should Know. And I emphasize all, and I made them put them in italics because it's very apparent from the introduction on. And I hope people read the introduction because it's the big why and the heart behind the book. But it's really sharing that our adverse or diverse experiences or backgrounds actually make us great and uniquely leveraged to do well in PR, right? If it's a relationship based business, then being able to relate quickly, culturally, and through differences and on our lived experience is important. But in the field, as far as what people report, it's about 13% people of color NPR, and that's a huge gap, right?
Yes.
It shifts a little bit, 13, depending on what report you're looking at, maybe up to 18. But again, that's not what our country looks like in the US. And certainly globally, that's not representation. And I haven't really felt, Monica, I don't know about your experiences, I'd be curious to hear, but I really haven't felt anything innately discriminatory about the PR profession or practices or even the pros I've worked with. So I think some of it has been a little bit, for sure, lack of awareness. There's not a lot of PR major tracks in colleges. The stats are in my book on that. And then there's not a lot, there's just a huge lack of awareness. And so the book to me too is just, it's a legacy gift, right? Literally
Hmm.
self-funded because there's only 3 to 4% of Latinos are authors. So I couldn't really wait around for the publishing industry to say, we want someone like you. And then when you intersect that in a business PR book, like it becomes such a niche that I thought, this is a really important message. And my calling for it didn't come at a comfortable time. I had more of that aha moment when I was in church one day during the height of some of the scariest time of the pandemic in 2020. And I was praying for guidance on how to be this business owner and PR counselor and help the clients figure out all the pivots they needed to make. I mean, I'm a ballerina by now, right? Spinning everywhere.
Spin around.
Spin around, honey. Let's go. And but at the same time, I needed support, and so I really clung to my faith, and that is scary too, right? So there's a lot of faith walk, I think, and whatever faith someone subscribes to, believes in, whatever grounds them. Like you're going to need that if you're doing trailblazing work. You're going to need that if you're a powerhouse woman, because there's times where people do not want you to succeed. Or, there may be a real ceiling on you. And some of it, honestly, is self-imposed. And a lot of times, women don't want to hear that.
And I've noticed that, as we, in the different eras. So I saw more perhaps overt. Nowadays, I think there's discussion, or at least talk about being open and inclusive. That discussions weren't really happening when I first entered newsrooms. I had to fight for story ideas that to me was a no-brainer. Why can't we do a Black History Month profile piece? Why do I have to explain that? It's Black History Month. It's February. What are you talking about here? So I've noticed some differences as well. So yeah, and even with all of that, it is still our responsibility to push through it, recognize that there could be some legitimate barriers, but that doesn't mean we don't do our best and our darndest every time to break it, go around it, go under it, go over it, whatever we need to do as well. Yeah. Well, a final thought, I want to ask you how people can find out about the podcast, subscribe to the podcast, how they can get the book when it comes out in October, how they can follow your great work. I want to mention that you are an internationally recognized and accredited, award-winning public relations expert. You're a national columnist with 2 decades of this extraordinary work that you're doing. Yes, you are pioneering, you are trailblazing, and you are leaving a legacy.
Oh, thank you so much. I honor you, and I appreciate everything you're doing, because you're finding a way too, right? You're like, oh, I'm not going to wait for someone to give me a show. I'm going to make my own show.
Right.
So here we are.
Right. And age doesn't matter. I'm a little bit older than you. So age, I can accept ageism, or I can just say, no, I'm going to create it. I'm not going to wait for you to give it to me.
That's right. We're going to appreciate wisdom. That's what we're centering on right now, because I think everyone needs a little more wisdom, don't we?
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Well, the simplest way to track everything, find the podcast, the book, what's going on, get some free PR advice, get some, free mentoring, is our website. Go to our website, www.mvw360.com. mvw360.com, and you'll have links to all kinds of information about what I'm up to, and then what our firm is up to, and how we can help each other out, because that's what we're here to do, is build relationships. And the podcast is available on just about every podcast player that's out there. And I interview all types of communication leaders in the industry. And so it's different sides of the house, right? We talk about PR, we talk about marketing, talk about advertising. We get into some of the niches, because we just get more and more expansive every day. And what you need to know just keeps ratcheting up, right, Monica? So we got to keep educating ourselves. I think anyone in communication has that ownership, that we have to be accountable in that way for those we want to message with and talk to. So it's important.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being on the Powerhouse Woman Show. I just like, I think we're kind of kindred spirits. I just feel it and I just see it. So thank you so much for being on the show today.
Absolutely. And I'd love to have you on the podcast so we can talk longer and really get into it.
I was going to invite myself anyway. So thank you. Thanks so much. And thanks to all of you for being on the show and joining us today. You are a pioneer, you are a trailblazer, and you are deserving of what you're putting in the world. Until next time, enjoy this day, keep being a powerhouse woman, and we'll talk to you next week.